Hello friends, welcome back. Today we shall continue with the discussion of the first topic of the first unit that we started in the previous lecture. Uh, the topic is Introduction to the Age of Chaucer. In the previous lecture, we opened the topic with the discussion of various eras and periods of the history of English literature, into which the whole history is divided. Then we found out that the very beginning, in the very beginning part of the history, we find this age of Chaucer. Then we saw what is medieval period, what is Middle Ages. Then we talked about the Renaissance age and Renaissance movement, psychological as well as intellectual movement it was. પુનર્જીવન or નવજાગૃતિ જેવા શબ્દો આપણે એમાં જોયા. The period is of intellectual awareness. The age of Chaucer is named after the name of a great poet, writer, philosopher, as well as social reformer, Geoffrey Chaucer we have, and his time period is from 1343 to 1400, who lived for 57 years and served society as well as literature greatly. So we remember his name as a great personality so far as literature and society is concerned. We discussed many more things regarding the background of the age of Chaucer, social, political, religious complexities that prevailed into this time. Then we talked about the two different mindsets, difference between the two eras, medieval era and the Renaissance period. We also understood communism and individualism, the difference between the two. Then we talked about the dark period, darkness that prevailed during the medieval era. Darkness meant three terms that are associated with corruption, injustice and ignorance. Then we talked also about Black Death that affected half the population of England. It is a great disease that happened or took place during that time. And ultimately we talked about the two bright stars named Chaucer and Wycliffe. These two personalities, of course they were literary personalities, but they brought light to the society, so they worked as social reformers. Now let us go ahead with the discussion of the characteristics of this era. The first thing we need to mention is feeling of national consciousness. National consciousness is a kind of feeling that affects the society as well as the politics. The 14th century was a period of great political, social, religious and literary activities. Politically, it was a period of 100 years war. 100 years wars. આ એક ફ્રેઝ આપણે સમજવું જરૂરી છે. 100 years wars means it is a period of 100 years, around 100 years, from 1337 to 1453. These are the years during which we find there is a series of conflicts continued between England and France, and it affected the whole of both the countries, socially, politically and economically. All these three facets of life, human life, were affected by these events or the conflicts of these 100 years war, which strengthened the feeling of national consciousness and patriotism both in England and France. Now, any war or any national conflict naturally affects the citizens because such kind of attack or such invasion naturally um, provokes nationalism among the citizens of that particular country. So the same thing also happened here, and this roused national consciousness and patriotism among the citizens of England as well as in France. Nation gained importance over the religion. Till then, we find religion prevailing on the mind of people all the time, constantly. And during this 100 years war period, nation gained importance over the religion. So, nation first became the mindset of the people. Religion. English Parliament came into prominence. English Parliament means the government came into prominence. It was also a period of rapid growth and trades and commerce. The democratic tendencies spread in every field of life. It was a period of rapid growth in trade and commerce. Trade and commerce also developed greatly because of the new inventions, new knowledge, awareness among the people. All these things affected greatly because of the impact of Renaissance on the society of England. The democratic tendencies spread in every field of life. Each and every aspect of life was affected uh, with the democratic tendency. So, the growth can be seen or development could be felt in the society. The next important characteristic that becomes trade and commerce, how it was developed and grew in the European environment. As the trade and commerce expanded and new towns developed, the middle class arose and the old feudal system declined with increasing power and money. Trade and commerce, વ્યવસાય, વ્યાપાર, એટલો બધો વિકાસ એનો થયો કે જેમાં પેલી જૂની ફિડલ સિસ્ટમ એટલે સામંતશાહી, કોઈ ચોક્કસ પ્રકારની લશ્કરી કે કોઈ આવી ગવર્મેન્ટની સેવાઓ કરવાના બદલામાં મળતી જે જાગીરી કહેવાય, એ જાગીરીનો યુગ હવે અહીં પૂરો થાય છે. લોકોનો દિન પ્રતિદિન વિકાસ થતાં એ લોકોની પાસે સમૃદ્ધિ આવે છે, પૈસો આવે છે, પાવર આવે છે. ઓલ ધીસ power and money that affected the social structure, and it was changed from feudal system to individualism. The small traders grew into well-to-do citizens with their own residence. This is very nice thing to be remembered as well as understood. The small traders, small businessmen, they grew economically and they had their own residence now. They were living in the in a good position, and they had now money power as well as power in this society. As the terrible plague of 1348 affected half the population of England, it aggravated the peasants' problems by reducing the supply of labor, resulting in poverty, unrest and revolt among the peasants. Now, this social event which occurred during this time, the year was 1348. 1348ના સમયગાળામાં પ્લેગ નામની જે બીમારી ફાટી નીકળી, that affected greatly the population, half the population of England, and because of that reason the poor people, particularly the laborers, they died in great number. And when the laborers died, it affected directly and firstly to the peasants. Peasants means the farmers, જે મોટા મોટા જમીનદારો છે, ખેડૂતો છે, એ લોકોને સૌથી મોટી અને પહેલી અસર પડી. The peasants did not find labors, and because of that reason they had to face the loss in their business, in their farming business. Now laborers were less in number, and because of that reason they were very costly. So the price of labor that rose, and the price of bread or the grain fell. જે ઉત્પાદન થાય છે એની કિંમત ઓછી થતી જાય છે, અને મજૂરોની જે મજૂરીનો જે હિસ્સો છે એ વધતો જાય છે, જેના કારણે સમાજમાં ઇમ્બેલેન્સ ઊભું થાય છે. ખેડૂતોની અથવા જમીનદારોની સ્થિતિ બગડતી જાય છે. The attempt to control soaring wages of labor by legislation proved fatal. Legislation એટલે કાયદો, કાયદાની પરિભાષાનો ઉપયોગ કરીને ખેડૂતોની સ્થિતિમાં સુધારો લાવવા માટે જે મજૂરોની સંખ્યા ઘટી ગયેલી હતી, જેને કારણે ખેડૂતોએ ખૂબ મોટું નુકસાન ભોગવવું પડે છે. તો એ પરિસ્થિતિને સુધારવા માટે કાયદાકીય પગલાં લેવાનો જે નિર્ણય સરકારે લીધો તે એના માટે ફેટલ પુરવાર થયો. ફેટલ એટલે મરણતોલ. It was very dangerous, and because of that reason there was bloody peasants revolt in 1381. 1381 સમયગાળામાં એક ખેડૂતોનો peasants bloody revolt એટલે બળવો ફેલાયો. In fact, the vast difference of living status between the rich and the poor played a very vital role for this revolt. The living standard of the peasants or the landlords and the laborers, there was a great gap. The difference between their living standard was very, very high or great difference there was, and because of that reason the union among the people was not possible. So it became the root cause for the revolt. King Richard II suppressed the revolt. Politically, King Richard, he tried his best to suppress the revolt, and this suppression fostered in the lower classes a spirit of independence and made them no longer a negligible quantity in the life of nation. So when very harshly and very promptly when the king attempted to suppress the revolt, it became a kind of instigation to the lower classes, and they revolted like anything, and a spirit of independence arose into them, and that proved that the lower classes are not a negligible quantity in the society, in the life of the nation. So it was a very important event. Then the next thing, the next characteristic is condition of women. Women's condition was not good. Women were thought inferior to men. The condition of women was not good. They were considered very inferior to men. Men means પુરુષ વર્ગ છે એ સુપિરિયર છે, અને સ્ત્રીનો વર્ગ છે એ ઇન્ફિરિયર ગણાતો. So the difference between the two is so high that they felt neglected. Women were thought inferior to men. They were mostly illiterate. Women did not have good education. They were mostly illiterate. Illiterate એટલે અભણ. બિલકુલ એજ્યુકેશનનો અભાવ હોવાને કારણે તેમની સામાજિક સ્થિતિ દિન પ્રતિદિન ઉતરતી જાય છે. Women of lower class of society were doomed to a life of unrelieved drudgery. Unrelieved drudgery means ડ્રઝરી એટલે મજૂરી કે જેમાં કોઈ જ આરામ ન મળે એવી આખો દિવસ ખેતરનું ઘરનું વગેરે કામ જ કરવું પડે. That kind of drudgery they had to undergo, and they lived a very poor condition of life. The ladies of higher society showed false pity and sentimentality. The ladies of high society. Now we are talking about the difference between the two classes of women. The lower class women had to undergo the drudgery, and on the other side, the upper class women, they showed false pity and sentimentality. Pity means in Gujarati we call it daya. ખોટી દયા સહાનુભૂતિ બતાવે અને સેન્ટિમેન્ટાલિટી બતાવે, લાગણીશીલતા બતાવે. That is not necessary for the women of the lower class. They actually wanted the real sympathy, but they did not get it. The condition of women was very poor in terms of marriage also. The only alternative of marriage was nunnery. Nunnery means sadhvi bani javu. Nun, to be nun. Nunnery means to be nun. Nun એટલે સાધ્વી. કોઈ એક સ્ત્રી જો લગ્ન ન કરવા માંગતી હોય તો તે વખતની ધાર્મિક અને સામાજિક માન્યતા પ્રમાણે એણે નન એટલે કે સાધ્વી બની જવું પડે. She had to become a nun and offer herself to the church and the church services. So she was exploited by the religious authority, the church authority, and she could not live alone in the society. The churchmen looked at women as the source of all evils. The churchmen means the religious people, they considered women as the source of all evils. While the poets presented them as adorable creatures. Now, this is the difference between the common people and the religious people. The religious people considered women as source of all evils, means everything that becomes or that prevails evil in the society, that is because of the women. And on the other hand, the poets means the literary personalities or the social leaders, they considered women to be adorable creatures. Adorable creatures એટલે સમાજનું ઘરેણું. એવા વ્યક્તિઓ, એવા આત્મા કે જે સમાજના આભૂષણ છે. તો સ્ત્રીને એક ઊંચો દરજ્જો આપવાનું કામ કવિ કરે છે, સાહિત્યકાર કરે છે. Whereas the religious people, they considered women to be very low. Child marriage was also in vogue among the rich and wealthy people. Rich and wealthy people, સમૃદ્ધ અને પૈસાદાર લોકો જે છે એ લોકોમાં ચાઇલ્ડ મેરેજની ફેશન પરંપરા ચાલુ હતી. Dowry was in practice and girls were sometimes sold. Dowry, dahej. Dowry system was in practice. People were practicing dowry, means taking and giving. Dowry was in practice, and girls were sometimes sold also. So this is the condition of women during this time. Then the next one is corruption in church. The church was greatly corrupt. The church was very corrupt. The Pope pretended to be not only the religious head but also the secular head. The supreme authority was Pope in the Roman Catholic Church. Roman Catholicism was the prevailing religion in that time, and priest, pope, monks, all these characters, they were the religious leaders, and they exploited the society like anything. As we are going to discuss the topic of Renaissance, Reformation in detail later on, but at this point we need to mention that Reformation and Renaissance, both these revolutions, both these movements affected greatly the uh, time span of this era. So, church was very corrupt here. On that time, Wycliffe condemned on the corruption, vice, and luxury of the church. Wycliffe, the contemporary writer of Chaucer, we mentioned his name as a bright star along with Chaucer, who tried to expose the corruption and vice that prevailed in the church. The churchmen also indulged in luxurious life. So, luxury was practiced by churchmen, and they always exploited, or rather extorted, money from the society. England broke the relationship with papacy. Papacy, it's a new term for you to understand. Papacy means the powers of Pope. Powers of Pope. Pope means the religious leader in the church hierarchy. Uh, so the papacy means the powers of Pope, they were not accepted by the society. સમાજના લોકોએ, પર્ટિક્યુલરલી ઇંગ્લિશ પીપલે, પેપસીને ફગાવી દીધી. એટલે પોપના પાવર્સને એ લોકો હવે સ્વીકારતા નથી. Indiscipline took place in the church due to corruption. Indiscipline in the church. Church was corrupted, and because of that reason, indiscipline that prevailed in church authority as well as church hierarchy. So the Reformation movement started. Now, as I mentioned, Reformation movement was very necessary. Reformation, the word itself is suggestive of the meaning that reformation, પુનર્નિર્માણ કરવાની જરૂર ઊભી થઈ. શેનું? ધર્મનું. So reformation of religion, particularly Christian religion, that was Roman Catholicism, that needed to be reformed, reconstructed, and that this was the time into which the Reformation movement started. The writers like Chaucer, Langland, and Gower satirized the churchmen. Satirize the churchmen means the activities that was being conducted by the church people associated with church, they were exposed, or rather exhibited by these writers like Chaucer, Langland, Gower, and in a very satirical manner. Satirical means kataksh ni bhashama. They started writing into their literature. Then the next point is literary characteristics of the age. Now, being the students of literature, we need to understand, or rather we need to concentrate on the literary aspects of any era. Means this age, means the age of Chaucer, how was the literary condition in this era? Let us see it. In the literary field, the age of Chaucer witnessed the rise of the English language. The rise of English language could be seen in this era. Means Chaucer and his contemporary writers, they became the uh, exponents of new English language, or uh, changing the English language from Old English to modern English. The East Midland dialect of English became the language of London and the universities. There were dialects prevailing in different parts of the country, England. Dialects, you understand. Dialect means in Gujarati we call it boli. બોલી આપણે જેમ ગુજરાતીમાં અલગ અલગ પ્રદેશની અલગ અલગ બોલી હોય, ઉત્તર ગુજરાતની બોલી, કચ્છની બોલી, સૌરાષ્ટ્રની બોલી, સાઉથ ગુજરાતની બોલી. તો ભાષા ગુજરાતી છે, પરંતુ એની પ્રદેશ પ્રમાણે અલગ અલગ બોલી હોય, તો એને ઇંગ્લિશમાં ડાયલેક્ટ કહેવાય છે. સો ઇન ઇંગ્લિશ language also there are so many dialects, and this East Midland dialect Chaucer and his contemporary writers selected, and they chose it to be the language of London. London means the capital of England, and the universities. So it became that dialect became the official language of England, and it was used in the universities. Chaucer made this dialect the standard for future writers. He wrote in this particular dialect, and this dialect was established as a standard for the future writers. So with the writing and publication of Canterbury Tales, Chaucer established a landmark in the history of English literature and language. So language and literature, both the things were reformed, redesigned, restructured, and made innovations by Chaucer and his contemporary writers. The era witnessed the foundation of an original English prose style in the works of Mandeville, Mallory, and Wycliffe, who was the translator of the Bible. Wycliffe was the person, the writer who translated Bible from original Hebrew language to English language. So there are so many translated versions of the Bible into English as well as many world languages, but Wycliffe was one of them, and he gave the authentic version of Bible to the English society, English people. In the field of poetry, Chaucer, Langland, and Gower rendered meritorious services. The poets named, namely Langland and Gower, along with Chaucer, they also gave meritorious services. ખૂબ મહત્વની નોંધપાત્ર કહી શકાય તેવી એમણે સેવાઓ કવિતાની દુનિયામાં એમણે આપી. The age witnessed the growth of new literary forms like allegory, the ballad, descriptive and narrative poems, and the metrical romances. New meters like rhyme royal, Ottawa rima, and heroic couplet came into fashion. નવા નવા પ્રકારના સાહિત્ય સ્વરૂપોની શોધ થાય છે, અને નવા નવા મીટર્સ એટલે છંદ ગુજરાતીમાં આપણે કહીએ, એની પણ શોધ કરી છે. Rhyme royal, Ottawa rima, and heroic couplet that came into fashion. The age of Chaucer is a period of great activity in all walks of life. All walks of life, જીવનના તમામ ક્ષેત્રે ઘણો બધો બદલાવ એમાં આવ્યો છે. ચોસર ના સમયગાળામાં. This age, with all its vexed and troubled problems, approximates the modern age. Vexed and troubled problems, જે સમાજને ઘણી ચિંતામાં મુશ્કેલીમાં મૂકે છે, એવો લાંબો સમયગાળો વીત્યો છે, પરંતુ એ ટ્રાન્ઝિશનનો સમયગાળો રહ્યો. that this age proved to be a period of transition from medieval to modern. So the transition period means the in between period between the medieval and the modern era. The age thus was the beginning of serious literature in English. So English literature found its new form in the hands of these authors like Chaucer, Gower, Langland, Wycliffe, etc. This is how we come to know about the characteristics and the background of the age of Chaucer. Now, with this discussion, we shall move ahead to understand the other topics, and along with this, we also will discuss someday about the Renaissance and Reformation, both these important movements that affected the whole of Europe, particularly the English culture, English environment, English language, the religion, that was Christianity. So they are very necessary things to be understood by us. Okay, friends, with this we conclude the discussion of this age of Chaucer. In the next lecture, we shall continue with the next topic. Okay, thank you very much.